and welcome back. It's a magical Monday for our book talk video today. We're going to deal with two books. They are both winners of Goodreads 2020 Best Book categories. We're going to look at House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, which really is not my cup of tea. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. It won for the Best Fantasy Book of the Year. A lot of people love this book, so I hope I don't upset fans of Sarah J. Maas and people who like this book with what I'm going to say in the video. And we're also going to look at the winner of the romance category, From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout. What's weird to me is I feel like these two books could have swapped categories. I feel like very much that From Blood and Ash was a fantasy book that has a somewhat sweet and interesting romance story within it, with its plot twists and such. And that House of Earth and Blood, while it is technically a fantasy, has more of those romance elements than it really does fantasy. But those are just my opinions. Clearly, thousands and thousands of people disagreed with what I personally think when it comes to the voting, and it's not really my place to second guess the voting. I am just as a reader and writer trying to figure out what is popular and what the people like. So I will say my warnings and issues with House of Earth and Blood are that I normally do not read romance books. I do not expect graphic depictions of sex scenes and such in my books, so that threw me off. Though, my goodness, I can't imagine this book as deserving of winning a category. Like I said, I don't think it should have won the fantasy category. I think, if anything, it might have a shot in the romance section. But even there, I don't think it's a very well-written book. And so to try and figure out what was going on, I did go online and I read reviews to see what other people thought. And my goodness, there are a lot of mixed reviews on this. People seem to either love it or hate it. And even fans of Sarah J. Maas, some of them have posted reviews saying that they think it is her worst book, that it feels like it is a first draft, and that it did not have quality time going through the editing process and that sort of thing. So I will say I'm not alone in my thoughts about the book. One of my main concerns is that it's called a fantasy book, but I didn't feel like there was a real fantasy world or world building with it. It is technically a fantasy, but to me it just felt like it was set in our modern world and the characters were said to be fantasy races. Like, to me, the main character could have just been a woman living her life in the modern world who occasionally goes, "Hey, I'm a half-fae," and something about some wolf pack that was killed. But ultimately, to me, I didn't understand if she was supposed to be a werewolf or what the deal was with that, because to me, werewolves are not fae. I was quite confused about that element of it. But again, the world does not feel like a fantasy world. It feels like a modern world. And I don't just mean in the sense of you read something like the Dresden Files that takes place in the modern world. With the Dresden Files series, they clearly have a fairy realm and these real fantasy creatures that live up to the ethos of their fantasy races. You know, in the Dresden Files series, you have a fae queen who behaves like a fae queen. You have vampires who behave like vampires. To me, the characters in this book just behave like humans. They didn't behave like fantasy creatures. And to me, even though I think the author tried it more toward the end of the book to incorporate more of the cultural stuff, it was confusing and misplaced. I was going to DNF the book, but I really wanted to finish it so that I could wholeheartedly give a real review of it. But like I said, it's not my cup of tea. It's not something I would normally read. I have recently read some other books that were in the fantasy category, Piranesi and The House in the Cerulean Sea. I know both of those were in the top 8 or 12 for the finalists in the category. Either one of those books, I felt, really was more deserving of Best Fantasy Book for 2020. But that's just my opinion. Moving on to the other book, From Blood and Ash. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. At first, the book had some slow pacing. I questioned what was going on with the world, the concept of this main character as a maiden who had all these weird restrictions leading up to her ascension ceremony, but I suppose it is somewhat similar to some sort of cultural initiation into adulthood, except something magical and sinister going on with it. The book got better. So I will say with From Blood and Ash, I think it starts out kind of weak, but it does pick up. Probably if you can get yourself through the first 75% of the book, I would say the last 25% of the book is worth it as a read, with the twists and the turns, which may be predictable, but predictable is not always bad. It can be fun to predict what's going to happen and how the twists are going to unravel at the end. In this one, you get a subtle sense of world building that's going up, and the ending clearly makes it the first book in a series where the author wants you to keep buying more books to see how the story is going to unfold. The book felt like Act 1 of a larger story, so that you're not really getting a full plot, in my opinion. But if you enjoy romantic fantasies with subtle mysteries in them, then I think that it could be worth a read for you. And this book was not over the top with the sex scenes and graphic depictions, so it did not bother me to read in any way whatsoever. I wasn't blushing as I read the descriptions of what was going on. I hope that you got something from my book talk today. I hope that you enjoyed the book talk. Every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.